Mary had a little lamb.
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Help is on the way.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
You've been cleared since really January 6th itself that he bears responsibility. Have these hearings demonstrated that Donald Trump needs to be prosecuted?
Ultimately, the Justice Department will decide that. I think we may well, as a committee, have a view on that. If you just think about it from the perspective of what kind of man knows that a mob is armed and sends the mob to attack the Capitol and further incites that mob when his own vice president is under threat, when the Congress is under threat. It's very chilling. And I think certainly we will, continue to present to the American people what we found.
So the committee will or will not make a criminal referral?
We'll make a decision as a committee about it.
So it's possible there will be a criminal referral, which
yes.
would be effectively the committee saying that he should be prosecuted, and this is the evidence that we've uncovered.
The Justice Department doesn't have to wait for the committee to make a criminal referral.
Right.
And there could be more than one criminal referral.
Are you worried about what that means for the country to see a former president prosecuted, a former president who is a likely candidate, who may in fact be running for president against Biden? It would be Biden's Justice Department. It would be prosecuting.
I have greater concern about what it would mean if people weren't held accountable for what's happened here. I think it's a much graver constitutional threat if a president can engage in these kinds of activities and, the majority of the president's party looks away, or we as a country decide, we're not actually going to take our constitutional obligation seriously. I think that's a much more serious threat.
So there's Liz Cheney being interviewed over the weekend about whether or not there'll be a criminal referral from the January 6th Select Committee to the Justice Department, pointing out a couple of things that are very important for everybody to understand and know. What kind of a man sicks a mob on the United States Capitol who attacks his own country? What kind of a man actually knows his vice president is inside the United States Capitol in the seat of government that has an official proceeding to certify the election results and decides to sick the mob on them, telling them, I'll be there with you. All right. That is a fascist strongman. That's the answer to what kind of a man does that. A fascist does that. A strongman does that. A demagogue does that. A cult leader does that. That's what kind of a man does that. The idea that he needs to be held accountable is not lost on the majority of Americans. The majority of Americans agree on a whole host of things. And one of those things is that the president of the United States assembled the mob, called the mob to action, and stood back and watched the violence and enjoyed it. And this was after months of a procedural coup, of a bloodless coup attempt to overturn the will of the people. This wasn't even a close election. And let me tell you something. This country, this is the problem. The minority rule in this country is so elevated right now. It is given such priority. And you understand that the filibuster rule in the Senate, that's a veto. That's a veto for the minority. Anything that the majority wants, the filibuster is how they veto all common sense legislation. Everything from background checks, which we all agree on, to leaving Roe alone. Most Americans want Roe left alone. Liz Cheney is not one of those Americans that wants Roe left alone. There's a whole host of policy positions I would disagree with Liz Cheney on, but this is not one of them. This holding the president accountable for being a fascist dictator, for unleashing a mob, for an attack on the United States of America, either the bloodless attack on the United States of America and all the way through to the bloody attack on the United States of America. And the issue that was brought up in that particular interview about what will it look like if Biden's Department of Justice, meaning Merrick Garland, who's obviously independent from the executive branch, but what would it look like if Merrick Garland prosecuted Donald Trump and Donald Trump announces he's running for president again? Won't it look like a political prosecution? This is why we have the January 6th Select Committee. This is why it was convened. This is why it's still got hearings to go. You know, they'll tomorrow, Tuesday, next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Thank God it's 10 a.m. Thank God. Gives me a chance to, you know, organize and cut the clips, right? But next Tuesday will be another hearing of the January 6th committee. This one is going to look at how the mob got the news, how the mob was assembled, who was, coordinating them, who was, the go-between. What are the names that we need to know about the mob itself, and how they were told to stand back and stand by in September. In September, before the election, remember that presidential debate where Joe Biden and, Donald Trump were on the stage, and they asked him about this white nationalist group that, was for him, that was supporting him, that was energized by him and his violent racism. And he said, give me the name, give me a name, give me a name. Because, he's just like every caller we have. It's all semantics. It's how you put it. It's like, it's a game. And when you answer their question, they move on, they change the subject, and they move to another thing. But what about this? And what about that? And what about Hillary? Really? And her emails. I mean, it's crazy, right? And he said, well, give me, and Chris Wallace, who was the moderator of that particular debate, September 29th, I believe it was, he said, oh, Proud Boys, for instance, Proud Boys. And he said, oh, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And Enrique Tarrio, who was the head of the Proud Boys, wrote him back on Twitter and said, standing by, sir. And then they provided the security for Roger Stone with the Oath Keepers, and they met in a parking garage and coordinated. So that's what the next hearing will be. But I think it's tomorrow or Friday. Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, the John Dean in the entire scenario. He is the White House counsel, meaning he was not Donald Trump's attorney. He was our attorney, protecting the office of the presidency from people like Donald Trump. Pat Cipollone didn't want to testify. He still doesn't want to testify, and he won't testify in public. But he agreed, finally, after Cassie Hutchinson pointed at him 10, 15, 20 times as being the person who said, Cassie, don't let him go up to the Capitol. Don't let him go there. He will break every law that is on the books. He will be, responsible for an insurrection. He will be responsible for seditious conspiracy. He will be responsible for violence against the Capitol. He will be responsible for every law you could possibly imagine in Section 18 of the Criminal Code. Don't let him go up there. So finally, he said, I'll give an interview on Friday, but behind closed doors. So I imagine on Tuesday, we'll see clips of his deposition that he's going to give on Friday this week. Meantime, the white ethno-nationalists, the supremacists, the ridiculous, violent ones among us, they're dialing Adam Kinzinger's office and threatening Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger's life. This is a very long tape. I mean, Adam Kinzinger posted this on Twitter last night, and I want you to understand that the people who receive these messages are not Adam Kinzinger, and they're not Liz Cheney. They're staffers. And these staffers are, sometimes they're interns who come from high schools, and they do public service to get credit or to learn how government functions or how it works or what the parliamentary procedures are in a House of Congress or in a governmental, federal government position. And they volunteer. Some of them are college students interning. Others are paid. And I don't know if you have any idea that a congressional staffer probably makes about, if they're lucky, $30,000 a year. And they work from like 8 in the morning till midnight just to get the experience on their resume. That's who's getting the call. Don't have time to listen to the live show? Want to hear more on your schedule? Go to randyrhodes.com and buy a stinking podcast.